Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the many members of the public who've come to see our deliberations this evening. Welcome to the Planning Control Committee on Thursday, the 10th of January 2019. Are there any apologies?
Chair, Councillor Evans.
Councillor Evans, thank you. Late items to be introduced by the Chair. Just briefly, members will have seen a sustained attack recently in the print media against planners in general and councillors on planning committees in particular. I'm rather pleased that there's been no attempt to deal with that anything other than the contempt it deserves. However, I thought it's worth reading out some of the other side of the story. I have a couple of emails very quickly to read to you. Dear Ian and Rory, they're planning officers. Many thanks for sending through the approved decision notice for our planning application. My wife and I are absolutely ecstatic and extremely appreciative of your decision to approve our plans to extend our family home. We must commend the planning application process. This is our first time applying for any type of planning permission. The process has been extremely smooth, forthcoming, with expectations of a decision date and a very user-friendly in allowing us to track progress on the online planning portal. We wish you and your families a Merry Christmas. You've certainly made ours. And I had another one. I've received your email and decision notice with regard to the above application overnight, and it is obvious that you were working well into the evening, for which I would like to thank you sincerely. There are tight deadlines for the exchange of contracts in this matter, and you have now helped to put the applicant's mind at rest. I anticipate being instructed to prepare further additional details early in the new year, and I will be in touch again with you at that stage if anything needs clarifying. Have a great holiday. That decision notice was issued at 10 p.m. one evening. Thought it was worth mentioning. Any declarations of interest? None. Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of November 2018. Thank you. Minutes of the meetings of the Conservation Area Committee held on the 18th of October. Okay. That takes us to matters to be considered, applications to be considered. I intend to take the Mickletover one first because I think we can resolve that fairly quickly. So that is Uttoxeter Road. It's on page 112. And Ian's going to introduce that to us.
Thank you, Chair. Just first and foremost, housekeeping items. For precision, the description of the application requires amending to change of use from bank, use class A2, and subdivision of building to create a micro pub, use class A4, and education centre, use class D1, together with a first floor rear extension and installation of new windows and doors to the front elevation, just to make sure that the subdivision of the building is included within the ambit of the description, Chair. On to the main report, Chair. In terms of the main issues, I have little to add to your report. The proposal would bring a vacant building back into use as a micro pub and small-scale educational establishment in the sustainable district centre location. The micro pub's at ground floor, and there's a portion of the education establishment at ground floor with the rest on the first floor, together with that small extension that's highlighted in grey-blue on the screen. The building is prominently located on the junction of Uttoxeter Road and Station Road, and the introduction of the elevational changes at ground level would improve the active frontage to the benefit of the district centre as a whole. The proposal also includes a small first floor side rear extension, which would be discreetly positioned within the context of the street scene, and there are no objections to that built component in design or massing terms. However, Chair, ward members have expressed strong concerns about the impact of this proposal in parking terms. There is no on-site parking capacity, but of course it is highly accessible for pedestrians, cyclists, is located close to bus stops, and public car parks are available within the district centre. Highways colleagues raise no overriding objections, and there are, in this case, Chair, no defensible grounds to resist the grant of planning permission. Councillor Holmes is here to address members, Chair. Thank you very much.
Councillor Holmes, you have 3 minutes like everybody else.
Thank you, Chair. Mickleover Village is a major route through the ward, has very significant traffic and a wide array of community facilities and businesses. Parking issues have started to become a serious issue and challenge locally. We're also now seeing general highways issues as well. Many thousands of new homes are currently being built close by, and traffic is therefore increasing significantly into and through the village corridor and other local main roads. Frustratingly, developers refuse to agree any significant 106 monies for highways or improved parking investment in the village area, as this would have contradicted their stated position that there would be minimal impact. So quite simply, as things stand, there are not an adequate number of parking spaces to cater for the current situation, let alone the impact of new businesses that submit applications without delivery of parking spaces. And ultimately, Derby City Council will be required to make a significant capital investment soon to mitigate something that the local planning system has entirely failed to contribute to or provide thus far. And that is why, as ward councillors in Mickleover, we take a very keen interest in local planning applications that propose a requirement for staff and customer parking. It's important to state that we have no objection at all to the micropub. Our concerns are focused on the education centre. The application's design and access statement states up to 16 customers and up to 5 staff at any given time will use the education centre. It's not good enough to cite private car parks and nearby local residential streets for parking mitigation. For example, nearby Warner Street is extremely busy to the point where residents have sought a permit parking scheme. The applicant made a statement that customers will mainly walk to the centre or come by bus, mentioned by the officer. This is just not based on reality. By all comparable examples, the majority of customers will almost certainly travel by car. These are just 2 examples as to why we felt we had to ensure our concerns were formally raised. And as I've said, we feel the application did not recognise or understand the established highways and parking issues being experienced in the locality. Either that or the application sought to downplay the parking impact, as it clearly is a significant flaw in choosing to open an education centre in a building with no parking. Since then, in regard to the concerns we've raised, the applicant has submitted further clarification. However, we're still far from satisfied. Non-formal arrangements in principle with the managers of the Nag's Head and Tesco's to use their private parking facilities are not planning conditions or enough for the committee to accept as mitigation. They have no formal standing within the planning process. Also, stating that staff would seek to pay local residents to use their driveways is also not a formal condition, nor is there any way to ensure that this occurs when free parking can be sought locally, impacting even more on the already limited available spaces. The Mickleover councillors felt strongly that committee and officers were given an understanding of our motivation in bringing this issue before you for a decision, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Would the Highways Officer care to comment on anything that's been said?
Thank you, Chair. There's not really a great deal more I can say other than is in the report, I'm afraid.
Mr Woodhead, do you want to come back on any issues?
No, Chair. I mean, just to say that it is in the district centre. It's something that we would, encourage in a district centre location. It was formerly a bank which would have generated its own trips of customers, etc. It's this small scale in terms of floor areas. The micro pub, most people hopefully will not drive there, and we think there are opportunities in terms of public transport, cycle, pedestrian connections and other car parks to accommodate this quite safely. So I don't think we could sustain any objection on those grounds, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand Councillor Holmes and his colleagues' argument, but this is an existing bank which was open during the day when there is congestion. A pub tends to have different hours, and I can't see that there's that much difference, that not strong enough for us to refuse permission. Members of the committee, Councillor Kerr.
Littleover village also has already got, in fact, 2 little education centres. One of them is, again, on a corner. It's not as busy a corner as this. And the issue, and it does have a little bit of on-site parking, but the majority of the on-site parking doesn't seem to actually be used because the issue is manoeuvring. It's people who are coming up and trying to drop children off without actually parking. It's people who are not quite arriving at the right moment to pick the child up. And I can therefore see that the issue here may need a little bit of monitoring. If you look at the overhead This has a good supply of double yellow lines on all the corners, but double yellow lines don't prevent people parking to deliver and pick up. My view, as yours is, Chair, is that this isn't something that we can refuse, but I do think it's something that would be worth passing back to the highways officers to see if we ought to be strengthening the enforceability of those double yellow lines with stripes on the curbs so that people can't stop off on those corners and drop, because I think that might be the issue.
Mr Woodhead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's also bollards now on the footway that have been recently installed, so that will right on the corner of Station Road and Uttoxeter Road. So that's another issue that has been installed recently. And in terms of the lay-by, you can see was heavily parked today when I went to look at it. So I appreciate what Councillor Holmes is saying, but I think in this case, given what we are dealing with in terms of the scope of the application, I think we've got enough opportunities for other modes of transport.
Any other comments from members? Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I think Ian summed it up at the beginning. There isn't any grounds for us to refuse this permission, bearing in mind micropubs at Uttoxeter Road, Chester Green, Village Street, Cuddleston Road, Ellis Street. I don't see how this is any different. And by asking for parking, are we encouraging people to drink and drive? And in terms of the educational centre, well, it's not a school that's going to be having 100 cars or whatever. So, as I said, I can understand Matthew and his colleagues bringing, I nearly said Matthew Southern Comfort then, right, bringing this, but really it could have been dealt with under delegated powers. There's no grounds to refuse it.
Anybody else? Councillor Kerr.
Just wondering if we could have a comment from the officers about strengthening the enforceability of no parking.
Would you care to comment at this stage on that?
I can discuss that with my colleagues in Parking Service to see if it's actually possible to do.
I'm sure the councillors in the area will keep it monitored anyway, and if there's a problem, draw it to the attention of the appropriate people. I don't think it's something that the planning permission would involve. The recommendation is to grant planning permission with conditions as set out, page 120, 121. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
That's unanimous.
It's unanimous. Thank you. Therefore, planning permission is granted conditionally. There'll be a shuffle of officers. And we will move to page 1, land off Phoenix Street. And Mr. Clark's going to introduce this to us.
Thank you, Chair. Housekeeping first and foremost. We have one further letter of support for the proposal from the Derby Cathedral office. We have a letter from Derwent Valley Mills Heritage Partnership, who make comments, or their comments currently are reproduced on page 17 of your report. On the 14th of December, further comments were received that reiterate their concerns and focus specifically on the more recent Integrated Heritage Townscape and Visual Impact Assessment document. They raise concerns over the impact of the development, particularly on the specific viewpoints in that document, which are listed in the 5 bullet points of their response. In using the words monolith, overly dominant feature of the skyline and harmful to the setting of the World Heritage Site, this letter reiterates that whilst the principle of development on this site is not considered to be wholly unacceptable, it would, as it stands, amount to a degree of harm on the outstanding universal value of the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site, amounting to less than substantial harm as defined by the National Planning Policy Framework. Both of those representations have been circulated to you members. Now, for clarity, on page 68 of your report, we have referred to Church House on Queen Street as a listed building. In December, it was delisted. So you need to take a pen and cross out that bullet point on page 68. So that is not a listed building anymore. Housekeeping over, Chair. Your report identifies the relevant issues and constraints. There has been a recent committee site visit and a viewing of the fly-through video which the applicant provided, together with the long and short distant photographs that accompany the application. There has been considerable scrutiny of the proposals from various quarters, and we are now in a position to debate the merits of the scheme as outlined in your report. On an existing car park, an existing surface car park, it's proposed to erect a new building comprising 202 apartments with ancillary facilities in a form that would extend from 23 metres through to 54 metres in height. Those elevations are on the boards and on the screen in front of you. Beneath the building, some 47 car parking spaces are provided, and there is a 30-space cycle store. Vehicular and pedestrian access would be directly off Phoenix Street, with an emergency flood evacuation bridge at first floor level, providing access to St Altman's Way. As members will know, this riverside area is contained by the river to its west and south, and the A601 elevated inner ring road immediately to the north. Both features effectively sever the area of land from the uses beyond. This is effectively an island site where many of its land uses are low-level car parking. This area of the city has been identified as having significant development potential to provide the city centre living that we need and to help meet our growth expectations in such a sustainable location. Unlike many city centres, this whole area has limited constraint. Where the elevated road network offers opportunity for height and the prospect for changing the Derby skyline to a city with growth aspirations. Currently, the Derby skyline is relatively level, punctuated by individual towers. This proposal takes that theme, providing a development that can be seen in two distinct heights, and you can see it there on the slide. One, a tower with effectively those frontages are about 18 metres in width, and that fronts onto St Altman's Way and to the Derwent Street slip road, and a flank wall, that's the lower wall that you can see on the bottom slide. That flank wall is some 23 metres in height and 28 metres long along St Altman's Way. I've said many times that if Derby is to grow and fulfil its potential as a city, it needs to grow upwards. The proposal seeks to take advantage of the growth aspiration and located furthest from the river and the World Heritage Site, proposes a development of 17 stories. That's 54 metres in height. And to help put that into context, the Stewart Street apartments rise to 9 stories, with the adjoining offices that back onto the river at 3 stories in height. Jury's Inn is some 40 metres in height. The Cathedral Tower, as we found out on our site visit, is 65 metres in height, and the recently approved development at Bio House, 45 metres tall. There are no highway objections or Environment Agency objections to the proposal, and the scheme provides an integral flood defence into its build. And that is something we would be looking for from the OCOR principles to protect developments in the potential flood zone. As members may recall, National Planning Policy Framework, and to save me saying that throughout, I'll just say NPPF, confirms the importance and a duty to make informed planning decisions on how special interests and significance are managed as places develop. Assessing significance and the impact on significance of heritage assets, assessing substantial harm and that mitigation are strengthened in the most recent NPPF. There have been considerable concerns raised about the impact of the development on designated heritage assets. Concern that the proposal would compete with, in certain views, the cathedral, its townscape and its setting, the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site, Nottingham Road Conservation Area. And that photograph is taken from the Nottingham Road Conservation Area directly outside the Peacock Hotel, before and afters. And, of course, the other heritage assets as expressed on pages 68 through to 75 of your report. There are objections from Historic England, the Conservation Area Advisory and other historical societies as reported on pages 8 through to 33 of the report. There are, I feel, two opposing camps of thought. Growth and tall buildings of the right quality of development in the right place at the right time, or to keep this island location low level so that the tall cathedral plus nearby heritage assets can be appreciated unimpeded across open vistas. There might be a meeting of the two in between. Given its height and location, there are other impacts as discussed throughout your report, such as on Nottingham Road Conservation Area and its finer grain and local townscape. This tension is expressed in your report with letters of support from the Officers of Regeneration and Major Projects, Housing Strategy and Marketing Derby, in addition to the supporting letter from the Cathedral, as indicated on pages 50 through to 59 of your report. To this end, the 3D analysis of the building in its context has been extremely useful. It is agreed that the building will result in less than substantial harm to those heritage assets that are listed on page 68 as we've just amended. And as I explained on pages 75 through to 79, those socio-economic benefits as a result of the proposal have been expressed. As members will recall, and in accordance with the MPPF, that harm to those heritage assets needs to be weighed against the benefits of the scheme. It's that balancing exercise and judgment that needs to be made. The decision maker, that's the planning committee, has to weigh in the balance these socio-economic benefits with the harm that the proposed development would have on the designated and non-designated heritage assets. Overall, planning balance is summarised on pages 86 through to 87. It's no doubt this is a tall building in a prominent gateway location, close to a number of heritage assets which all play an important part and role in defining the city's image. It is the scale, the mass, the external appearance of the building and its height that has attracted such wealth of objection. The benefits arising from the proposal do not, in my judgment, outweigh the harm created. You may differ. In my opinion and judgment, taken on board the respective representations and comments, the benefits do not sufficiently outweigh the harm to the designated heritage assets in this particular case. So in my judgment, there are reasonable planning grounds to resist this proposal for the reasons explored in your report. This concern and conclusion is expressed in the first and second reasons for refusal on page 88. Chair, you have an extensive report and now have speakers from both those polar views to amplify their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I call Mr. Jackson of Cushman and Wakefield first? Thank you. The order of speakers is the speaker's own choice. I haven't rigged it in any way, so thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. This application before you is the culmination of over 2 years of collaborative working with your officers, key stakeholders and city, within the city and members of the public. The proposed development will provide 202 city centre apartments. That's over 10% of Derby's planned provision for the city centre, and it will significantly reduce pressure on the city's green belt. The proposal aligns with your authority's strategic vision for the city centre as set out in your local plan and adopted city centre master plan. It's a strategic gateway site capable of accommodating a tall building. The building has been designed with a focus on sustainability and high quality living space. Photovoltaic cells are located on the entire roof space, contributing towards the building's energy requirements. Electric vehicle charging points will be provided on site together with 32 cycle storage spaces. The applicant is in discussions with Co-Wheels Car Club and the e-bike scheme to encourage sustainable travel by residents of the development. The building also provides a gym, concierge, cafe area and residents' lounge. The applicant is committed to working with your authority and is confident that matters raised late in December relating to replacement of trees and the relocation of the plant room to the first floor can be easily addressed. The building's design has been informed by an iterative review process involving the city's 3D model and extensive consultation. A public consultation prior to the submission identified overwhelming support for the proposed development. Following submission, the city's urban design officer provided a consultation response which stated that, "I recommend from an urban design perspective that this proposal be approved." This consultation response is not actually set out in the committee report, which I believe to be an unacceptable omission. There have been no design changes since this response. None have been requested because the design was supported. The urban design officer had seen all the visual analysis before the application was even submitted. At the end of December, the urban design officer has responded with an entirely contradictory recommendation. The applicant has received no explanation, and this runs contrary to the collaborative spirit in which this significant proposal has been brought forward. And it does not provide the committee with a clear and consistent advice on which to make a decision. In considering the balance of matters raised by this application, it's acknowledged by your officers that the proposal will deliver substantial benefits and will result in less than substantial harm. On that basis, I respectfully request that this committee approve this application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Phipps of Latham Architects.
Thank you. From a heritage perspective, the critical question for the committee to consider is, does the application result in substantial harm to the historic environment? And the answer to that question, as has been pointed out previously, is no, it does not. Our assessment, based upon extensive modelling and testing of the views identified to us by the City Council and Historic England, concluded that the scheme results in less than substantial harm. This is a conclusion that is shared by both your own officers, as we've just heard, and by Historic England. Historic England and the Council are supportive of the redevelopment of the site, and the City Council has supported and encouraged the applicant to locate a tall building on it. A tall building is, by its very nature, going to be visible from various locations around the city, including from the World Heritage Site. However, visibility does not equate to visual harm. If this was indeed the case, then the City of London would be a single-storey city, and the views of the World Heritage Sites, including the Tower of London and the Palace of Westminster, would not include any tall buildings. We recognise that Historic England has requested additional verification material, and we have liaised with them throughout the application process to ensure this information has been provided and meets with their requirements where possible. This material has been provided to a level which, in our experience, is perfectly adequate to explain the potential visual impacts of the scheme, and is significantly more extensive than material provided to support other large applications affecting the setting of heritage assets within the city. The method of verification and the techniques employed have been used successfully by Lathams elsewhere throughout the Midlands and the North, with full support from Historic England. World Heritage Site monitored views, which are defined, are not affected at all by the scheme. Views from the city centre towards the scheme are altered by the scheme, but given the foreground context, the changes must be seen as minor, and this is recognised by the Cathedral's supportive letter. It is recognised that the setting of some heritage assets and some views will be affected by the scheme, and we've been open and objective about our assessment of this, as you'll see from the assessment report. The scheme causes less than substantial harm, and it is necessary to weigh this against the substantial socio-economic, regenerative and perceptual benefits of the scheme that will be delivered for the people of Derby. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, I'm sure is well known to most of us, Mr. Forkin of Marketing Derby.
Thank you, Chairman. Everybody in this room desires what's right for Derby, and for hundreds of years, Derbyans have helped to change the world. The shape and form of our city reflects this. The 16th century cathedral tower, the 18th century silk mill, the roundhouse, hub of railway invention in the 19th century, and the giant aerospace testbeds of the 20th century. Innovation is in our DNA. Today, our city, like many others, faces an existential threat, the decline of its centre. Figures this week show Derby's annual footfall is down 10%. You only need to walk out of the door of this building to see we're struggling to keep our heads above water. And as a Derbian, this hurts me to my core. We all want to see a vibrant city where people live, work and visit, and yes, live. Cities can no longer just be shopping centres. In the UK, sitting living is up by 150%. In Derby, it's only 32%. The national average for city centre residents earning above the national salary is 5%. In Derby, it's 0%. Every evening, money leaves town, draining out to other cities. This week, a lovely restaurant, Terrar Bistro on Frygate, closed down, quoting lack of weekday trade. Rolls-Royce say that a significant proportion of young people attracted to the company choose not to live in Derby due to lack of good quality rented accommodation. The Landmark building can play a role in turning this tide. It will provide homes for 350 people. Working people, people earning good money, paying taxes, using local shops and amenities, building a new community on North Riverside. The Landmark investment is £30 million, generating a further £38 million in economic activity. Standing before us tonight is £68 million asking to come to Derby. They could choose to invest this anywhere, but they chose Derby because they believe in our city. The Landmark will provide quality, well-managed green homes on a disused site adjacent to a 6-lane highway. Over 10 years, the Landmark will bring £5 million to Derby City Council. The 202 homes will help Derby achieve its tough housing targets. It will take pressure off the endless planning applications for new homes on green fields in and around the city. Yes, it is a tall building. Yes, it will have some impact. But we need to build a 21st century city. Businesses want it, the public want it, the cathedral wants it. Truth be told, the city needs it. Historic England say the Landmark could cause less than substantial harm. You can decide that the considerable and significant benefits we have outlined far outweigh that harm. Derby has a proud past, and tonight, committee, you have the power to help create a vibrant future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, would you like to come back on the points raised?
I've probably got about 4. I agree that reasons 3 and 4 of your report, the 3 reasons for refusal 3 and 4, could be overcome quite easily. In terms of a consultee's response, consultee will give an opinion or give me advice based on the latest information that they have. And obviously the latest information that was generated was the heritage and visual impact statement. So a consultee could quite easily change their response based on that latest information. I agree the city centre, or we need city centre living. My question is this the right development? And is this the right building for this site, given its impact on the heritage assets? That's where I have, and that's where the report has the concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Members of the committee? Please, yes. Sorry? Another speaker? Oh, beg your pardon. I'd got a 1, 2 and a 3. I hadn't got the 4th. Most important, yes. Mr. Walsh of Historic England, beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee. Historic England's role as the government's expert advisor on the historic environment is to provide advice to your authority where planning applications affect our built heritage. The historic environment is an integral part of the identity and character of Derby, particularly at this important gateway location on the riverside, which includes the Cathedral Silk Mill and the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site. Derby's heritage forms part of what makes the city an attractive place to live, work and visit, and also to invest in. We encourage good new development which enhances the character of Derby, and we recognise that tall buildings will form part of Derby's growth. Together with your authority, we are part funding a heritage evidence base to inform a strategic approach to tall buildings in Part 2 of the local plan. However, we don't consider the Phoenix Street site is right for a building of this height. It would be very harmful to the setting and significance of the heritage assets affected and would loom over key historic spaces and buildings due to its height, scale and mass. It would be an intrusive visual presence when viewed in approaches to the city centre and the conservation area, and it would greatly reduce the prominence of the cathedral as an existing landmark which signifies the heart of the city, for example in views along Nottingham Road. As an intrusive and dominant feature in views along the river corridor, it would also harm the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. As such, we believe it would erode the vital contribution that the Cathedral, Cathedral Green and the World Heritage Site, including the Silk Mill, make to Derby's identity and attractiveness. We also don't consider that the building has the quality required for a landmark. So in our view, the proposed scheme fails to comply with the MPPF, and we don't think the harm caused to multiple heritage assets is justified, nor is it outweighed by the public benefits. As case law confirms, considerable importance and weight is to be given to the desirability of preserving the setting of a listed building, and less than substantial harm isn't considered acceptable harm. Together with your authority, we've invested in successful heritage-led regeneration in Derby, for example in the Cathedral Quarter, and substantial public funding is helping regenerate the Silk Mill to turn Cathedral Green into a vital hub in Derby and the southern gateway to the World Heritage Site. We consider that the proposed scheme would run counter to these initiatives due to the harm caused to the historic environment. We think the scheme misses a key opportunity to bring forward high-quality development on this site that would enhance and add to the existing historic elements of this important gateway and help deliver sustainable regeneration of the riverside. Accordingly, Historic England objects to the application on heritage grounds. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anything you want to come back on there, Mr. Clark? Thank you, Chair. Thank you. In which case, Councillor West, you indicated you want to speak.
Thanks, Chair. It's interesting that so many of the committees who've written in to object are concerned by views of the Cathedral and the Silk Mill. Yet there's been no representation from Derby Museums, and the Cathedral has been represented in favour of the application by the Economic Development Advisory Committee through Marketing Derby's letter and by the email from the Dean. When plans were put on display at Quad last year, there was very strong public support. I do feel that whilst quite rightly a large number of organisations exist to protect our heritage, they far outweigh the number of bodies who are appointed to promote healthy redevelopment and regeneration of our fine city. We've had tall buildings in the vicinity before. St Altman's Church was 66 metres, and we currently do as well. I think that, well, my opinion is that the benefit outweighs the harm for this application, so I disagree with Officer's recommendation. I would, however, like to see a condition that there's further flood risk protection put in place regarding the plant room, and see retention of relevant trees for environmental reasons. But other than that, I would be thrilled to see this building added to the Derby skyline, send a message that Derby is not closed for business, and, if you'll pardon the expression, see the landmark rise like a phoenix from the ashes.
Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can't use that phrase now, but phoenix rising from the ashes. Thank you very much for that, Councillor West. But if we go back, those of us that were on this committee when Jury Zinn applied for permission to build that, there was people, people who were suspicious, skeptical about the skyline, this and that. Now, you know, let us look at what is there at the moment and what is being passed. If we talk about the skyline, are we saying that the people who are going to look at Derby skyline are going to stand behind this building and they can't be bothered to move to either side? You know, it doesn't make sense that this is going to alter the skyline of Derby. If we look at, I mean, as the speaker earlier on suggested in terms of, rising heights of buildings, this is the 21st century. We want people to live in the city centre. We want our shops to thrive in the city centre. Yet 202 apartments being built in what is, I think quite a reasonable design. I don't see how we can say, well, no, this is wrong because of what might be done to the cathedral's eye line or this and that. I mean, you have a letter from the Reverend Dr. Stephen. They have no objection to this. Why are we objecting to something that's needed? Not just for living, but for the city, its shops. You see a number of pubs have closed around the Chester Green area. They're closing around here because of there's, the lack of footfall, lack of patrons there. Here is something that I believe in 10 years from now, people will say, you know what, that's a good idea, that is right. But like anything new, there is suspicion, there is skepticism, and there is, people who will say, no, we shouldn't have this, right? But then again, we've seen many buildings recently in Derby that, maybe not as high as this, but people have objected to them, oh no, we don't want a high-rise building here. Nobody's complaining about them now. I don't see what harm this is going to do to the city or to its skyline. I believe this will enhance the city centre by people visiting the shops and then the restaurants and the pubs and the takeaways and the retail shops. We are losing them, daily. Right? We need city centre living, and something like this, which is sort of built to rent, is what's needed here. Why are we turning something down and saying, well, go to Nottingham, go to Leicester, go to Staffordshire, when we can have this here? I don't see anything wrong with this, and I believe we should support it.
You.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I note that this is designed as a rent to build, and it's going to attract vibrant young workers to the city. But I'm just a bit concerned about, if you research, 80% of the working population of the UK are disabled, and I'm just looking at 2 disabled car parking spaces, and I can't find anything that discusses what apartments are disabled friendly or cater for disabled. Also, the travel plan. Concerns over inadequate cycle spaces. There's only 47 car park spaces, and the development is being promoted as cycle friendly. 30 cycle places provides only 15% of households with cycle parking, well below the guidance levels, and I'll bow to Councillor Kerr's experience on this, but it should be a lot higher than 30 cycle places. And also the 6-lane highway that passes nearby. It's noted in the travel plan that it's free-flowing with a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. I think anybody who comes to Derby or works in Derby knows that that free-flowing 6-lane highway is gridlocked for several hours a day. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A question of, I think, first of all, to Mr. Jennings. We've got the obviously the city centre master plan in place, which has been approved by full council, and I wonder if, Greg, you could perhaps just explain how this sort of fits into the city centre master plan, that bit, because it is obviously a material document for consideration with planning applications.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this is wholly consistent with the City Centre Master Plan, which was, of course, approved unanimously at full council in 2016, but also with the City Centre Region Framework for 2012, the Our City, Our River Master Plan, which I think Chief Planning Officer mentioned in 13, and the City Living Initiative in 14. All of those see this area as a potential area for high-quality housing. I think the applicant, from a strategic housing point of view, has come forward with high-quality housing on this site. I would have to say we have worked hard to get City Living going, with some successes, not enough, for all the reasons that we know, that people living in the city centre is much more sustainable, they spend money in the city centre, lower carbon footprint. That's absolutely the right thing to do. They contribute to the city's economy. My concern would be there are enormous benefits here, and the weight and the balance has to be right, and please do consider there are significant benefits in maintaining that city living. If we lose this, I have to say it will probably be a bit of a body blow to the work that officers and developers, together with planning officers, have sought to achieve over the last few years.
Councillor Rawson, do you want to continue?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think, as has been said already, I mean, there are two very important things to weigh up and balance, and Greg's spoken a little bit there about the economic benefits, and I think you'd be really hard pressed to find a negative from the economic and social impact point of view in terms of redeveloping a brownfield site, something that we government encourages to do, something that we always say we would rather do rather than building on greenfield or greenbelt sites. It would be a first in terms of a private rented sector in Derby, a significant sizable PRS development that would contribute towards our housing targets, which we have. And in terms of support for the big employers in the city, Rolls-Royce, Toyota and Bombardier recruit nationally, internationally, and the sorts of people that they're looking to recruit, graduates. There's a real gap in the market at the moment in terms of this sort of accommodation that those sorts of people who perhaps aren't looking to buy a house in the suburbs just yet, but who are absolutely vital to some of those big and small employers. So it fills a gap in the housing market, in my view. I won't go through all of the benefits. They're there in the report and speak for themselves. In terms of the weighing up the heritage aspect of this, I think somebody made an important comment earlier on. Visibility doesn't equal harm. It is a tall building, and personally I've absolutely got no objection in principle for tall buildings in Derby, as long as they're in the right place and of the right quality. So what we're talking about here is not about losing any buildings of heritage value. It's an empty site at the moment. It's a car park. What we're talking about is the impact it will have on how heritage assets are viewed from various points in the city. And I think whilst it is absolutely important that heritage buildings are protected and people can see them, I don't think that anyone would ever suggest that you have to be able to see the cathedral or any other of the historic buildings from every single vantage point in Derby. So I think it's just inevitable in many ways as cities grow that there will be some impact. We have to balance that with the economic benefits, and in this case I think I come down very, very firmly on the side of the economic benefits outweighing the relatively small amount of harm that there may be from some vantage points in the city. Very limited in my view, having considered and having seen the photographs that we've looked at tonight. So I think it is actually a really good scheme. It fills a gap in the housing market in Derby. It'll bring people into the city centre. It'll tackle the decline that we have in the high street and all of those problems. We've been talking for a long time now about city centre living, and when we have the opportunity to give the go-ahead to a good quality scheme like this is, then I think we should take it, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
I also think there's some good things about this scheme, and I appreciate the comments, the positive comments that the applicant was making about working with our officers, because I'm somebody who believes that working together you're more likely to get a good outcome. Talk about co-wheels, about e-bikes, about a significant amount of cycle parking, though, as has been said, for 202 places to not have enough cycle parking for one cycle parking per house, for even one per flat, let alone one per person, does seem a little bit low if there's going to be a good travel plan included in a Section 106 agreement. So something like that is gone in the right direction, but we've not gone, I think, far enough. And if there were going to be a whole fleet of e-bikes there, there would be a loss of parking spaces, and that would need to be resolved within the thinking. So there has been some really good work. There's some reasonably green credentials for the building, and that is good and that is positive. However, and you knew there was a however coming, this will be for Derby a landmark building, and not just in name but in reality, because we aren't yet a tall city. If we were a Manchester, if we were a Leeds, if we were a London, this would be one of a number of buildings, and it would blend into what else is there. This building doesn't have anything to blend with, and that's not this building's fault, but it's the reality of Derby, and therefore it needs to be of a quality where people will look at it and think, wow. It doesn't matter, in my view, that it obscures some of the views, because you can have a tall building that frames a building behind it, that it can be obscuring the build behind and you can look beyond it. But a building that's by itself, you need to look at and think it's worth looking at. And because this is a groundbreaking building, it has to have the quality to people to look at it and think, yeah, that's good. Now, if you look at London, we know which ones are good because they've got names. They're called the Cheese Grater or the Shard or stupid names like this. And they do look significantly different to the other buildings there, and they stand out, and we don't mind them standing out because they are worth looking at. This building, I'm really sad to say, doesn't stand out in a way that you think, wow, Derby's got this wonderful building. It's not because of its size. I'm not an architect and I'm not an artist, but it looks to me a bit like the sort of 1960s blocks, some of which have now been knocked down. And therefore, I'm not against the concept. I think that the housing that it brings is going to be really, really important. I think that the position and that site is okay. We've got to think about how this building will frame the other buildings and not think of it as obscuring, but thinking that as you drive along the road, you come round to this building and you see the one beyond. And we need to look at it in those sorts of contexts. And I'm afraid, I'm really sad that this isn't that building. If we look at the footprint of the building, I think one of the reasons is that this, can we put the footprint of the layout up, looking from above? If we look, maybe the one without the car park, that's it. If we look at that, it's been fitted into the site, but it could have been fitted into 101 other sites. It's not shaping its building as part of its environment. It's not saying, as you come along the ring road, this is something that you access and you look round the corners of and you explore. It's there, it's sharply, it's all full of rectangles, but it's not on a rectangular site, it's not on a 90-degree site. It's not grown into its space. It's been plonked there. And I think that something that was more organically shaped into its site would sit more comfortably in Derby. It needs to have elevations that are worth looking at. And if we provided with something like that, then everything would be right. We've sorted the transport isn't a problem. The fact that it's big isn't necessarily a problem. But can we please have something that will be, somebody said something like this is needed, but it's only something like this. It's not actually this. So thank you. But please come back with something else. I hope we turn it down.
Thank you, Chair. Right, it's the gateway to the city, so it's important that whatever way we vote tonight, we get it right for the city. Because this particular application is going to be what everybody will see when they come into Derby, no matter where they come from. So you've got to say to yourself, do we want this kind of building being historic with the city of Derby? Or do we want to retain what we've got what we've achieved in the last 30, 40 years of making Derby very attractive to people when they come into the city. Many, many years ago, and I can remember this, we had on the sideline, where we had a power station. It was the most ugly, horrible building. And we got rid of it, and all of a sudden Derby came the better for it. And other buildings that we've got rid of over the years have made Derby a better place. In my opinion, looking at this application, we're going to turn the clock back 30 odd years. The building to me looks ugly. It doesn't blend in with the buildings around it. The height of it will completely impose on everything, not just in the vicinity, but considerably wider to that. I mean, the ICE buildings near to it only 9 stories high. This is considerably higher than Jory's Inn. And the comments being made about Jory's Inn, yes, I've been on this committee when Jory's Inn was accepted, and I remember it well. I think I voted against it. But the fact is this, that Jory's Inn is in a place that doesn't distract from places like the cathedral at all, because of where it's situated in the city. Yes, we do want city living. I go along with that, and I go along with all that Mr. Fawkins said about the situation in our city. I accept all that. But have we got to accept any building of any kind, even if it's ugly, it's mass, or indeed anything else, just for the sake of bringing people into Derby? And I say no. What we want are buildings that really complement the rest of the city. Yes, the ICE we've got, I think, is a little higher than 9 stories, but for all that, it depends where they are. And this building will not be in the right position and will certainly take a lot away from our city. And personally, I think that will be a retrograde step. Now, what about places around it? Well, we've got an estate that's been established hundreds of years, not far away, called the Liversidge Estate. It's a wonderful place to live, and it's iconic with the area. This building will actually impose significantly on the Liversidge Estate. That will be extremely detrimental, not just for that area, but would really enhance the fact that unfortunately we couldn't care less attitude towards those people that live there. To my mind, I agree with our officers 100%. The appearance leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not against building on brownfield sites. I'm not against them building where they are. What I am against is the fact that does it look right? No, it doesn't. It doesn't blend in with the other buildings around it. And I don't think that's good either. If they came back with another proposal that blends in with the buildings around it, I might have a different view, but I certainly wouldn't like the height or that. The scale is all wrong and the mass is all wrong. And quite honestly, at the end of the day, if we vote this through tonight, this will be one of the most retrograde steps this city have taken, certainly in my time on this committee, and certainly in my time. And I can say this, that I can remember the bad old days when Derby looked ugly, it was smog-ridden and what have you. And we are turning the clock back here if we accept this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Froggatt, followed by Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Hassel, followed by Councillor Pegg.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Kerr is right, the building could be better. It's unfortunately due to the committees that have written in to object that the applicants haven't submitted something more exciting, like the shard or the cheese grater, for fear of it being rejected. And if you want to talk about dull and hideous buildings, can I draw you to the opposite side of the A52, to Cardinal Square? That is horrendous. But it sits opposite, so it matches really, don't it? You know, it's there, it's a tunnel. But your gateway too, you've got Cardinal Square and you've got your new build. But I'm a grandmother with young grandchildren, and I want my grandchildren to live in a good, vibrant city. I don't want them to disappear out of my life into other cities. So I really want this building to be built in this city.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got in my mind's eye this argument that we need to attract young, vibrant, up-and-coming, well-paid executives, and this building will do it. And then on a cold winter's day, we give them some cycle clips and tell them to cycle to Toyota on the A38 or Rainsway or wherever. They won't stay in Derby. I certainly wouldn't. The other thing is, if you go on websites of social media and welfare think tanks, the majority state that high-rise apartment blocks should be bulldozed and replaced with townhouses complete with gardens to help tackle social problems, whilst achieving almost the same density of housing as high-rise. And my view is that is the way to go. These are the mistakes of the past and we're repeating them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This committee is amongst other committees and the council as a whole, are the custodians of the future of this city. And a lot has been said tonight about we need Derby to be better, need more vibrancy, more footfall, etc. But we should be here and be putting forward and agreeing for what is best for this city. And the designs here in front of us, I think the only phrase comes to mind is that Derby deserves better. I'm also mindful, and it is a little remiss of the plans that are all in front of us, that we, some point last year, agreed to a very large building next to the Exeter, a large glass tower building.
Biohouse.
Yeah. None of this takes that into context or puts it next to it in any way. So we can't really judge. However, you know, at the moment we can see this in front of us, and yes, it's a big block, and it's very, very ugly. It mirrors the ugliness of it mirrors the ugliness of Jury's Inn. This city was born on architectural excellence. This has been designed with a ruler and not much more. But I think, you know, losing views, yes, you may say it's not that important, and that is less important than bringing in the economic benefits of this. But, and I'm kind of reminded of what Councillor Khan has said, that in 10 years people may say this is a good idea, but they also may say the exact opposite. And this is the point where we've got to get that decision right. And we should not dive feet first into these sort of things. Councillor Kerr is dead right. It has no appeal. It does nothing for the city. And for me, the officers have got it dead right tonight. Thank you.
Chair, I was going to mention the biomass building. Of course, it's quite clear that it's closely situated. But I think we've got to start realising, as a city, we've got nowhere to go. We can't go sideways. We can only go up. We've come to the stage now within this city. Councillor just mentioned the number of houses you'd get. How many houses would you actually get on that plot of land that would help us with the amount of housing we've got to find? You know, we keep giving away all these, allowing extra HMOs and everything coming in, and we need other accommodation, far better accommodation. And for me, it's there as you're driving through the A52 from the Wyvern Centre right the way through. It's a mess. It's an eyesore when you come in down from the motorway or from Nottingham. And it's no wonder that people are actually going to Nottingham, Leicester to spend the money. They're going out there. You ask Trent Buses, they're doing a thriving business, and the trains, on people going out of this city. Mr. Falkin turned around and said, Rolls-Royce have said that there isn't the
the properties for their young executives to come and purchase or rent or whatever the case may be. Now, when you've got Rolls-Royce telling you that, with everything else that's going off with the finance of this country at the minute, we're going to be in a serious state. We are looked down, Derby is looked on as second class in the East Midlands. And it's high time we change this. And it's high time we started moving forward and started looking at putting buildings up like this so we encourage people to come into this city. My city, the city I was born and bred in, and we've destroyed it on many occasions and that in the past. And we now need to put this right, and we need to make accommodation for my grandkids and everybody else's grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the future. And I'm going to support this.
Thank you. Before we bring in Councillor Rawson again, I'd like to ask Stephen Teasdale, who wants to bring a legal point to our attention.
Earlier, sort of, just after Councillor Rawson had sort of raised the point, just to sort of to highlight, whilst the master plan might be a material consideration, it's not a development plan, so it cannot be given a great deal of weight. That was actually the only point that I meant to raise after that, after Councillor Rawson actually raised that point.
Just ask briefly in terms of legal things, is actually the tenure of the flats in the building a planning issue?
No, not directly in relation to this. It would be if you were dealing with affordable housing and that side of things, but in relation to this application, no, it wouldn't.
Councillor Rawson, you indicated you want to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it was Councillor Kerr who mentioned this, the difficulty of putting this building in context, because there's, at the moment there's not all that much round and about it. But the biohouse application has been mentioned already, which has been approved, which is nearby, and the whole of that area, the North Riverside, is due for regeneration as part of the OCOR works. So again, I wonder if Greg could perhaps say something a little bit more about how that fits together. And whilst it may seem rather large and out of scale at the moment, as that work carries on, there's the possibility to build something probably a bit more coherent.
We do have to look at the application before us, not what might be at some future time. I've no objection to Mr Jennings addressing the committee, but let's concentrate on the application as it stands before us. And we can't improve it, we can't detract from it. We either have to grant it or not. Mr Jennings.
Chair, the only thing I'd just quickly add, which hopefully will help the debate, and can I just say, I do appreciate this is clearly difficult. Members are going to find this difficult because there's never a perfect solution here, trying to weigh up the conservation harm with the economic and social benefits. In terms of the question, it's wholly consistent with the city centre master plan and with the OCOR area. And I would have to say, one of the things that worries me when I hear this debate is that everyone says we want city living for all the reasons that I won't rehearse again, because I think we do know them. But as soon as we have a really serious scheme coming up, providing 200 homes, which is about just under a third of our annual target, we're about to reject it, even though it is on the edge of the World Heritage Site in a very poor quality brownfield land, right next to the ring road, the other side of a conservation area. And we have heard from the conservation experts it's less than substantial harm. So I have to say, from a strategic housing and economic development point of view, I am really worried if we are rejecting this scheme, we really are in danger of singing the death knell to the City Living Initiative. Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to continue, Councillor Rawson?
No, that was just the point I wanted to make. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair.
Followed by Councillor
also in the report, there's some concern about the effect of the wind eddies on the 6-lane motorway at St Albans Way. We in Derby have got no experience of this at all. The only thing you can say is that if you stand near the cathedral on a windy day, you certainly get the effect of wind eddies. But I note it's somebody in one of the comments has said that we ought to do some real serious experiments or research into this. I don't know if the officers want to talk about that or say anything.
Thank you, Chair. No.
The officers don't want to talk about wind. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back a little bit on this. My reasons for objecting to this are the reasons that the officers have put forward, and particularly on height and mass and scale, and the appearance. And at the end of the day, the way that people are talking is, A, this is the only brownfield site in the city centre area. It appears that way to me anyway, the way they talk. And B, yeah, we will accept anything, no matter what it is, for the sake of 202 apartments to help our housing situation. Well, I'm not prepared to accept that. I mean, I'm not against the build on this site. I'm not against extending the city living situation. But what I object to is to passing anything for the sake of it. In my opinion, this building is ugly. It's far too high for the area it's in. It creates tremendous problems within the vicinity of it. And at the end of the day, it is just not right for Derby. A comment was made about Cardinal Square not being very good for the eye, and I accept that. But Cardinal Square is not 17 stories high. I mean, let's be realistic about this. People don't see Cardinal Square when they come into Derby, but they'll see this. And if it's not good for the eye, then it's not good for Derby, and this isn't good for the eye, in my opinion. I don't want to see this. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I certainly look at the cathedral far better than this. I don't think this is good for Derby, and I get a little bit perturbed that people talk about other areas of the country. I couldn't care less what they do in London, or Nottingham, or Leicester, or Birmingham, or anywhere else. What I care about is what goes on in Derby. I was born and bred in Derby, and I love the city, and I love the people of the city, and I'll fight for them as well as the people where I live. And at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, this is not good, not just for the city of Derby, but also for the people of Derby. There are other brownfield sites in Derby that, again, you could have these sort of developments, but certainly not 17 stories high, and certainly better artistically than the one I'm looking at the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Very quickly, Chair, I mean, we mentioned Cardinal Square and Biohouse. Let's look just across from there, the Lendar Forte building, we've mentioned the origin. Now, which one of them actually suits the area? They're all different. So I can't see how, you know, what's been mentioned here, it doesn't suit this particular. I mean, this is an area where you have terraced houses, you know, 2 up, 2 down. So who's going to come into our city centre on a site like this and build 40, you know, terraced houses, 2 up, 2 down? I don't see how we can attract somebody like that. Now, what we have tonight is not just this application, but the fact that are we saying as a city, we're not welcoming, you know, high-rise apartments because we want to stick to traditionalists. Right? Honestly, I can't see for the life of me how these comparisons have been made tonight about, oh, this doesn't sit well with it. I mean, if you look at Robert Street, Key Street, I mean, these are Liversidge properties and, you know, they are sort of terraced houses. Across the road, we mentioned Cardinal Square. I mean, then you've got the Ring Road, and across from it is Lendar 40. Further down, there's been houses built. What are we talking about? There is no consistency in that area in terms of the building. They're all different, and they will be different in future. Whatever is built here, it's not going to look like the terraced houses there. It's not going to look like the cathedral. It's not going to look like anything, because we want different buildings. We don't want to be seen to be having a, you know, sort of uniform block of flats all stretching along there. It doesn't make any sense. Whatever we build here will be different to anything that's around that, because there is nothing but terraced houses around there.
Thank you.
It is attractive, not overly.
Nobody else has stuck their hand up, so I think it's time I had a say. They say, if you can remember the 1960s, you weren't there. Well, I can remember it, and I was there. And people were condemned to live in tower blocks. Blocks of flats, we called them then. We didn't have names like apartments. They're flats, and these are flats. And those went out of fashion to the point where because people didn't like living in them, they're being knocked down now. Well, funny thing about Derby, we are a bit behind the times, aren't we? And we're now proposing to put up a block of flats. Why do we need to build up? It's not true that the city centre is full up. In fact, a third, and I'm told this by Trevor Raybould, who's perhaps the most senior chartered surveyor in the city, a third of Derby's real estate is vacant. Now that means that you could do an awful lot in the city centre to encourage city centre living, and I'm very much in favour of city centre living. What a good idea. But why do you have to do it at the expense of what is Derby's unique selling point? Our history, why we are different, why we are not a clone of Nottingham, why we are not a clone of Manhattan or the City of London or Croydon, for goodness sake. Because that's the sort of thing that this is telling people. This is all right for Derby. This would actually set a precedent, whether or not it's built. Now, you're all assuming that if you grant permission, it gets built. Well, you granted permission to buy a house. It isn't built. You granted permission for all of Frygate goods yard several times over. And look at it, empty. You granted permission for the DRI under huge pressure from Mr. Jennings to do something very quickly. It hasn't happened. You know why? Because a £300,000 car park with planning permission puts an awful lot of money into people's pockets. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. If this is granted permission, it would be lovely if it went up, yeah. And there's all these people waiting to live in houses who aren't going to have children, aren't going to have pets, don't like gardening. Where's the proof? Where's the proof? Where's the viability study in this application that there are these people actually wanting to do that? Where are the people who are going to work at Rolls-Royce and Toyota, as it says in the application, that they're going to go by bicycle and not own cars? All right, it gets built. The scenario is there isn't the demand because there's no proof of any demand. It's not been given to us a viability study saying this is what the people need and this is what the people want, and here are the people with ready money want to pay rent for it, and they're all graduates. You heard that bit, you know. Yeah, it doesn't happen. So you've then got a tower block full of flats, and you put homeless people in it, you put asylum seekers in it, and you get all those social problems right in the city centre. Do you really want that? You know, that perhaps is not a planning matter, but I think we as councillors need to be quite clear what this application is. There is no viability study given to us saying there is a need for this. In fact, there is a fact that a third of the city's real estate is vacant. There's plenty of scope for inner city living. There's the whole of Duckworth Square, for goodness sake, that's been derelict for how long? Decades. And I won't go into Victoria Street, but why can't people live there? They don't need to live in tower blocks. It's not a nice way to live. We would never build council houses in tower blocks in that sort of height. And a few years ago, you'd have laughed at this idea. Tower blocks, high-rise living, Ronan Point, Grenfell. No, thank you. There's an email from the Dean, and it's been said at various times this evening that the cathedral is in favour of it. What do they mean by the cathedral? Do they mean the congregation? Do they mean the diocese? Do they mean all the people that go there? All the people that visit the cathedral? Because if you're a stranger, come to Derby, you look at a building, oh, that's worth going and visiting. We have an email from the Dean. He's not been in Derby very long, and he said, "We note that the building is located outside the Cathedral Quarter Conservation Area. There is no such thing as the Cathedral Quarter Conservation Area. It doesn't exist. And to tell the very reverend gentleman that something doesn't exist, I can for once do it with proof. There is no, it just shows how much he knows about it, and I think we must take that email in the weight that tells us. There's been several mentions of committees that have written in. Yes, they are the people of Derby. They are societies who are interested in the country's heritage. But Historic England isn't a local committee, it's the government's advisor. And we've been privileged, I think, today to have somebody come from Historic England to advise us in the terms that they have. There's a number of buildings that have been towers in the past. The power station was mentioned. The shop tower, of course, was another one that went and improved the area tremendously. We're now on the site of the shop tower that was knocked down. There are some that are going up. King's Crescent by St Helens House. Controversial, maybe, but of a decent size and a decent design, and I think it'll be perfectly acceptable. I'm not against tall buildings in the right place. I chaired this committee when we granted permission for Jury's Inn, and I still stand by that decision. It was in the right place at the right time, and it is viable. It is used. People stay there and people come to the city. But we were given evidence at that time that people would do that. We've been given no evidence that people will come and live in little flats right in the middle of the city centre by a 6-lane highway. You're looking now at an illustration. I don't know what time of day or a bank holiday or a Sunday morning that picture was taken, but has anybody seen as little traffic as that? And would you want to condemn all these graduates with no children and no dogs and no gardens to overlook a 6-lane highway pumping out all the noxious gases that we're trying to do something about in this city? I don't think so, and I don't think this is the right application at the right time. And I don't think the officers came up with this recommendation lightly. They don't. They want to see Derby progress. They want to see inner city living, and they've worked hard to try and do it. And I think the recommendation is the correct one, and it's the one I'm going to vote for. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak before we move to the vote? In which case we will move to the vote. Those in favour of the recommendation, which is to refuse planning permission for the reasons stated. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7. Okay. The recommendation has not been accepted, so it is incumbent upon the committee to make a recommendation.
I move, Chair, that we grant planning permission for this development.
No section 106, no conditions?
Obviously, so subject to section 106 negotiations with the officer, Chair.
Vote to be minded to grant, and then we can come back with conditions, because I can't agree conditions with you.
Yeah.
And those mentioned by Councillor West earlier on, Chair, please.
Chair, if it helps, and as you voted to refuse the application, it might be better if we resolve the application by members being minded to grant planning permission, subject to a section 106 if need be, and subject to conditions. And I can bring those conditions back to committee, hopefully 14th of February, which is the next committee. I'd normally agree with the chair, but as the chair voted against the application, it makes more sense to come back to yourselves and we're not discussing whether it's going to be granted or refused at that stage, it's just the conditions and the section 106. If that's helpful, Chair.
Mr. Teasdale.
And I was just going to say that will allow the issues on the trees and the flooding to be addressed at that.
Okay. Can I emphasise then that it has not been refused, nor has it been granted at this stage? That is the status of the application. The application is still live. Councillor Rawson.
No, I wonder if we could have some legal clarity, Chair. Members have this evening voted to approve the application.
It hasn't been put to you yet. If you wish to move that and have it seconded, we will put it to the vote.
That we accept, that we move as planning permission granted, please.
The advice from your office is that you are minded to grant permission. rather than grant it at this point without any conditions.
In that case then, can I say that we are minded to grant planning permission? Could we move to the vote on that, please, Chair?
Is that seconded? Okay, that's proposed and seconded. Those in favour of that proposal? And those against? Thank you. So that has, the situation now is that you are minded to grant permission and that is brought back to the 14th of February committee.
So we might get challenged.
Okay, can we move to the Park Farm application then, which is on page 91? And Mr. Woodhead's going to come back and introduce that to us.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of housekeeping items, first one is to include a further condition to cover the precise details of bin storage and the management thereof for the life of the development. That's something that's missing from the recommended list of conditions. Secondly, other representations from Councillor Webb and Mrs Moss were circulated at 11:31 yesterday, so I trust you've digested those. On to the main report, Chair. This is a revised scheme which seeks full planning permission for extensions and alterations to Carsington House to form student accommodation on the roof of Park Farm Shopping Centre in Allestree. Members will recall the previous application which was considered by committee in July last year and was refused against the officer's recommendation. That application is currently the subject of a planning appeal, and Councillor Potter has been doing some work with Sarah Claxton to pursue that appeal. This is a reduced proposal, Chair, to replace the 22 existing one-bed flats with 14 flats to provide student accommodation with 70 bedrooms, comprising 6 one-bed studio flats, 4 6-bed and 4 10-bed cluster flats with communal kitchen and workspaces. The refuse scheme was for 128 bedrooms in 72 flats. In terms of design and scale, the main differences with the current proposal are that the side extension to the building is omitted, with only a rooftop extension giving an additional floor. The floor rises to about 4.5 metres in additional height above the existing building. The exterior of the building is to be refurbished with new window openings and a wrap-round aluminium facade over the roof and end elevations in a sort of dark brown colour. The bottom scheme, as you can see, is the previously refused offering. So we've got existing, current proposal and refusal in that order. The overall bulk and massing of the development is less than the previous scheme, and in the context of other apartment buildings in and around Park Farm Centre and its location within the centre, the additions are felt to be acceptable and in keeping with the general character of the centre. In terms of highways and parking, which was obviously a key issue last time, the building sits above the rooftop car park for the centre, which currently has 87 spaces for shoppers and 22 permit spaces for existing residents. The previous application was for a car-free development with no parking provided for the occupants. In response to concerns raised by members and residents, this scheme would allocate 16 spaces on the rooftop car park for the student occupants, as well as 1 disabled person's bay. 28 cycle parking spaces are also provided at car park level, alongside a bin storage area for the accommodation. That cycle parking would be inside on a twin rack, a double deck system. The supporting information submitted in relation to management and security for the accommodation demonstrates how the accommodation will be managed to provide a safer environment for the student occupants and to minimise disturbance for local residents and visitors to the Park Farm Centre. The Police Architectural Liaison Officer is generally satisfied with the proposals, subject to conditions being imposed to secure details of the overall management regime. A strategy for managing drop-off and pick-up at beginning and end of term time is also set out in the submission, and the Highways Officer is satisfied with the details of this plan. In terms of parking in general, it is likely that the limited amount of residence parking being provided would discourage cars being brought to the site, particularly since there are parking restrictions and time-limited parking in and around the centre. There are other examples of similar types of student accommodation elsewhere in the city, operating with no parking in a similar manner. The management regime adopted by the operators can also discourage residents bringing cars to site, and this can be controlled through condition 9 of your report. The highway team's position is that the existing parking restrictions, the accessibility of the development to public transport and cycle routes, and amenities in the close vicinity at Park Farm Centre, the proposed development would have a minimal impact on the local highway, particularly since the existing 22 flats, which have their own parking spaces, would be removed. The number of shoppers' parking spaces would be retained as existing at 87 spaces. Therefore, Chair, the Highways Officer overall has no objections to the proposal in relation to the highways impact, and my colleague can give further comment if required. In terms of amenity, Chair, the development would mainly affect properties on the Carsington Crescent frontage to the southwest of the site. The minimum distances between windows of nearby dwellings are exceeded for this development, such that there would not be unreasonable loss of privacy as a result. We are therefore satisfied that the extension to the rooftop would have a limited impact on the amenity of nearby residents in massing terms. In terms of the living environment provided within the proposed accommodation, Housing Standards colleagues advise that it meets the minimum amenity guidance, and the provision of study and common rooms in addition to normal living space is considered to be acceptable. Overall, the principle of a more intensive and larger scale residential form of use is considered acceptable in this location. Park Farm Centre is considered to be a highly sustainable and accessible location with a wide range of local facilities and amenities close to the site. The accommodation building is accessible to both the main university campus and the city centre. It would also deliver a small amount of additional new housing, contributing to the city's 5-year housing supply, and release existing student housing in the city to the wider market. The new housing delivery test included in the revised framework is included in your report, and there would be a net gain of 6 units in this case. There are considered to be substantial benefits which weigh in favour of the scheme, Chair, and subject to the necessary Section 106, which meet the policy tests in the framework and the adopted local plan, and the various conditions plus the additional condition for bin storage, I would promote the recommendation, Chair, and invite the 4 speakers to address committee.
Can we invite Mr. Arben to start, please? Thank you. On behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I firstly welcome the recommendation of the Officer's report to approve this application subject to conditions. The report is comprehensive, and I consider it sets out the key planning issues and that the proposals comply with the Council's planning policies. Members will recall determining and refusing a similar but larger application in July, and this refused application seeks to address member concern with regards to design and also the proposed car-free nature of the scheme. In order to address the previous reasons for refusal, the scheme has firstly been reduced from 128 to 70 bedrooms, and that there is no longer a proposal to provide the side extension to Carsington House. Only additional modest 4th floor extension is now proposed. The result is a substantial reduction in the scale, massing and height of the building. Significant changes have also been made to the external appearance of the building, and the mesh framing of the previous scheme is no longer proposed, with existing external brickwork now being retained and refurbished, and the colour palette proposed for the roof extension more in keeping with the existing building and surrounding Park Farm complex. There was much discussion in respect of the car-free nature of the previous proposal, despite the site being in a highly sustainable location with access to a variety of services and facilities, and also being in close proximity to the university. The revised proposal seeks to allocate 16 car parking spaces, including 1 disabled bay, to residents, along with the provision of 28 secure cycle spaces. This approach is supported by the Council's own Highway Development Control Officers. Access to the car parking space proposed will be restricted by an on-site resident permit scheme that will be operated and monitored by the on-site management team, and permits will be subject to a fee payable to the accommodation provider. Given the limited number of spaces available and the use of the fee system, this will reduce the desirability of owning a car on site. Notwithstanding this, there are existing parking restrictions in the surrounding area, and I'm aware that councillors and residents are working with the university to reduce the existing parking issues, which includes enforcing against those who park illegally, a further deterrent for residents of this proposal. With regards to the perceived amenity considerations in respect of disturbance to existing residents, shoppers, the applicants are committed to providing a robust security and management plan, which is to be secured via condition. This will provide a 24-hour on-site management team who will control all aspects of the operation of the accommodation in order to provide a secure environment not only for residents in the locality but also residents of the proposed accommodation. In summary, there are no technical objections to the proposal, and as set out in the Officer's report, the scheme is consistent with the planning policies set out in the MPPF, the adopted local plan and the Save Local Plan review. I would like to thank you for taking the time to consider the proposal and respectfully request the committee approve this application in line with your officer's recommendations.
Thank you. The next speaker then is Mr. Steer.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. There are so many issues with this application that in the time available I can only consider one: access. Parking at Park Farm is a problem. The lower level parking at Carsington House at the present time provides 53 public or shopper spaces. The higher parking level has 56 spaces, but is permit only for the 22 residents and for employees in the Park Farm Centre. Yet again, the committee report has got it wrong, stating there are 87 shopper spaces. The application before you shows at the lower level 16 parking spaces reserved for the new occupiers and 6 spaces lost for the cycle and bin stores, leaving 31 public or shopper parking spaces. Why are 15 of these new reserved spaces not at the higher level, in part replacing the 22 resident spaces, leaving the one parking bay, disabled parking bay, at the lower level, plus 46 public or shopper spaces? Then there is the shared access as highlighted by the police liaison officer. The plan for door security in Appendix A of the management plan shows that anyone can get a lift from street level to any of the 4 residential floors, and I leave you to imagine what might happen then. The applicant claims that there is no practical means of separating the public and student residents, yet the first application achieved this separation, and it can easily be repeated. What the applicant means is that separate access would cost. Part of the lower parking space is now storage for 28 cycles, but there's no way of getting there, as Councillor Kerr pointed out at the last planning application. The only way up is by carrying them up the stairs or in the lifts, one cycle and rider at a time. And I don't fancy going down a 1 in 4 ramp to get out. There are 15 1 cubic metre waste bins at the parking level. How are these bins to be emptied? There is insufficient headroom at the top and bottom of the 1 in 4 ramp to allow passage of a DCC refuse vehicle. Has anyone consulted the Street Pride on this problem? So we have student residents taking up precious public parking spaces, and unacceptable mixed access, and unusable cycle storage and waste bins. Surely common sense and practicalities says that the application is unacceptable, and I trust that you will refuse it this evening.
Right, thank you and good evening. The remit for planning officers is to support and guide developers with their proposals. We know that. But it's easy for them to tick boxes and gloss over the problems raised by the community in order to satisfy the range of planning policies in their report to committee. However, this is not a blank canvas proposal. Many Allestree residents are deeply affected by it. So no matter how you may look at it, I personally think it will be a sad day for Derby if the City Council is seen to support the eviction of the many decent residents of Carsington House, just because the owner investors want to make more money. The partnership between our council and the university has developed a large number of student flats in the city centre. This has enhanced an area of Derby into becoming the student quarter, with links to the university via Kedleston Road. Growth and regeneration of such areas benefits our city compared to the removal of affordable housing in our suburb. These university plans should take preference over ad hoc investment-led initiatives that have no local support or support from the university itself. There are problems with the Carsington House proposal. As Peter said, waste disposal, it's unclear as to how these very large bins will be emptied. Such an important health and environmental issue should be clearly determined. Current car parking problems will not improve by taking away parking spaces, and students with no personal outside space will inevitably create noise and disturbance because they're students. The proposed additional storey is referred to in the report as modest. Another 4.5 metres on top of a building, sitting at the highest point in Allestree, I would say is significant, not modest. And the police liaison officer states that existing security and safety problems of nuisance, damage and intimidation of shoppers will be compounded due to the single access. Allestree has antisocial issues, but we need to address these, not add to them. And yet the planning officer's report states as a matter of fact that this development will add to the vitality and vibrancy of Park Farm Centre. There's no evidence that that's true or indeed it will happen. Keep Carsington House as residential for the community, not transient places for students where problems will reoccur every September. This proposal is contrary to the housing strategy for Alistree, and it is at odds with and undermines the university plans. We need affordable housing for our young people, assisted living for the over 50s. The opportunities are endless for someone who actually cares about us and for our suburb. Do the right thing and reject this application. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Sorry, let's get the mic on. Good evening, members. This is the second application for these premises, and I note there is no decrease in height of the proposed building, which will not overcome previous objections of overlooking and massing. I also note that this application is not car-free and is providing 16 spaces for 70 people. This will only add to the current problems in the surrounding areas. This part of Alistree mainly provides accommodation for elderly long-term residents, some with support needs, and provides amenity at Park Farm that complements this. Planning proposal policy states in CP4, all proposals for new development will be expected to make a positive contribution towards the distinctiveness and identity of our neighbourhoods. The necessity for security on site suggests that this type of residential accommodation is a cause of anxiety among local residents. The security system may add to safety measures on site, but will not prevent activity outside the secured area, which is a major concern to residents. There is no net gain in housing. The 22 existing residents, after being evicted, will need rehousing, and that's policy CP6. There is no identified need for student accommodation in this mature suburb, as is shown by the university concentrating its facilities within a clearly identified university quarter and not supporting this application, which I have provided written proof of. So this would be against policy CP7. This proposed development fails to provide sufficient amenity either on or off-site and would cause unacceptable harm to the amenity of nearby areas and residents. Adding a transient population to this mature population will seriously detract from the amenity of nearby land property or the occupants thereof. That's against policy GD5. Can I suggest this application fails on CP4, 6, 7 and GD5?
Councillor Webb. Well timed as usual. Would the Highways Officer like to address any of the points that have been raised? And if bins are your remit, perhaps you can mention those too.
Well, bins aren't actually my remit, but as I understand it, the location of the refuse store isn't actually necessarily a planning consideration. It's certainly not a highway consideration because it's down to not the occupiers, the owners, to sort out how they're going to organise for the bins to be emptied. I've scribbled a few other notes down. Parking spaces. I understood that the application used existing allocated spaces, not ones that are available for the general public. I think Mr. Woodhead could confirm that. Yep. The site is in a sustainable location. There are waiting restrictions on adjacent streets that can be enforced, and ultimately I have to ask whether or not I can apply the NPPF, which says that I can only ask for a refusal if the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe, and I can't demonstrate that there would be.
Perhaps there's some other issues that need to be covered.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. In terms of bin storage, there's an email before me that looks at various options that the agent is considering in terms of how waste would be collected, how it would be managed on site, how it would be taken down to ground level and disposed of. That is something ordinarily that can be reasonably dealt with by planning condition for a scheme of this type. It meets all the tests of reasonableness, so we would ordinarily be dealing with that by condition, which we are with the recommended additional conditions. So that's to be looked at in consultation with colleagues from Street Pride, other private management companies, to explore the best option. So we could deal with that in terms of a preoccupation condition, which would meet the tests of planning conditions. That's bin storage.
Anything else?
Yeah, in terms of car parking, Chair, Mr Steer indicated there were 53 spaces on the lower deck, 56 on the upper. I think it's 54 on the lower, 55 on the upper. The proposal would use 22 parking spaces. It would be a slight reconfiguration of the parking spaces. They would be allocated, the 16 spaces would be allocated for the occupants within the envelope of the building, just beneath the building. So that would accommodate 16 spaces, so it would be 15 standard plus a disabled person space. The other 6 would be given over to the bin storage, cycle storage, etc. And then those spaces would be, that they were displacing, would be reconfigured into the upper level. So the overall position would be the same, 109 spaces. In terms of the mass of the building, the height of the building raised by Councillor Webb, the height, there is obviously a rooftop extension. It runs to about 4.5 metres in total. Obviously there's a big reduction in mass. The extension on the other side is removed. So in terms of overall scale, bulk and mass, there is a significant reduction, as Mr Arbon pointed out, from 128 down to 70 bedrooms compared to the previous scheme. So I think in terms of massing implications, that's been improved, and I do feel that the overall elevational changes in terms of the rooftop extension, the alterations to the facade, the refurbishment of the existing brickwork is a much better solution than was previously offered before committee. In terms of net gain of properties, we have used the housing delivery test in the framework. It's included in your report, and it does equate to 6 additional units. I appreciate that it has caused some concern, and I was at a public meeting back in May of last year. People were highly concerned about how the existing residents were going to be dealt with. But of course, Chair, that's not for us to determine. That's an issue of market forces. That's the private sector. That's Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market. That's what we're dealing with. So unfortunately, we can't intervene in that. It's the proposal before us is to change the use to student accommodation. If there is no market for it, then it won't happen. In terms of need, again, there is no need test in planning policy terms. Need was a test with retail applications some time ago, but no longer even a test with retail proposals. So we can't consider need, and the position that the university don't support this is not something we can consider. And on the final bit of your report, Chair, Section 106 monies goes to public open space improvements in the area and cycle and pedestrian connections. So that's mitigation for the scheme, Chair, and I've got nothing further to add aside from taking questions.
Thank you. I have had an anonymous request that can we get officers to use the term accessible rather than disabled? Presumably, Councillor Pegg, disability champion, is saying it, and yes, I do agree with him. Yeah, a disabled parking space is one you can't use, like a disabled toilet. Well, yeah, all right, won't go there. Anyway, Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. Back when this came to committee just before Christmas, I was against it then, and I'm equally against it now. There are many things wrong with this, and very little has changed. Yes, the size, The appearance may be slightly improved. However, as was identified in the earlier application, there's no identified need for these flats for students' apartments. We may not be able to take in consideration what the university has said, but they equally have not come around to back this proposal. And likewise, just because it's built in the vicinity of the university doesn't mean students are going to use it. There are many things that are uncertain with it, particularly the car parking aspect, which is wholly inadequate. Myself and my colleagues are fully aware of the ongoing parking issues in that area. This will only compound it. I would take question with anyone who says otherwise. Please go there when you have a load of residents around you complaining, and they will point out exactly what the state of the parking is in that area. This will add to it. As I've mentioned, it's unsure whether there is a need for this. I don't see that there is. But what is certain is that there are people who live here that call this place home. And this proposal takes that away from them. Now, Mr. Woodhead rightly says that is not a consideration for us. However, just because there is a policy that says we shouldn't, we are human beings on this committee, and I feel that we have a duty to protect those who, where policy doesn't. I certainly cannot vote in favour of this on many grounds, but unearthing people and displacing them in favour of something that is clearly not tangibly required is immoral, and I'll certainly be voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pegg and then Councillor...
Actually, I was going to raise a point that Councillor Hassell's raised. Before Christmas, I was involved in some people in Mackworth who were going to be evicted from the flats because its housing company wanted to redevelop it. I think we have a moral obligation to these 22 residents in Allestree, because just to turf them out onto the streets is unthinkable. Plus the fact it's putting more pressure on the council to try and find them accommodation. At this point in time, unless the developer can come up with a guarantee that they will be offered accommodation within the complex, the pot farm complex overall, I personally wouldn't vote for this, and that is something I'm concerned of. It is just the 22 residents. I think we have a moral obligation to look after them as much as anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Teasdale.
And I've been given notice.
Yeah, can I ask?
2 years later.
I appreciate you've waited a long time to hear this, but can we have the debate down here? Thank you. Mr. Teasdale is our legal advisor, and I think it's appropriate that we ask him to comment.
Yes. I know that there are emotional issues in relation to the points that you've raised, but as Ian has pointed out, I mean, they are not, and as was made clear at the last time that this matter was considered, they are not issues that you can take into account tonight in terms of determining this application.
You want to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, they're not part of the planning application, but they're part of our obligation as councillors and our moral obligation as councillors to look after our residents as much as anything. I agree that it's not part of the planning application. I totally agree with that. But as councillors, we would then be contacted to say, we've been made homeless. What are you going to do? Where are you going to rehouse us? And I think that is something that as human beings, we have to take into account anyway.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with that advice, but I just think it just shows the moral compass
of these developers, and if they act like a character out of a Charles Dickens Christmas trilogy, then I'm afraid you've got to doubt some other things. I would like, with your permission, to ask Mr. Arban a question, if that's okay.
With my permission, yes.
Mr. Arban, I think I've asked you this question before. These documents are littered, absolutely littered on every other page to say the development is only 600 metres or 10 minutes walk away from the Kedleston Road campus. Of course, Derby University has about 12 campuses throughout the county, as far afield as Buxton and Chesterfield. Are you saying, if approved, your students living at this development will only go to Kedleston Road?
I can't guarantee that, but the university do provide bus services, for example, to Buxton campus internally, and actually one of the services does stop outside Park Farm.
So why isn't that made perfectly clear in the documentation? That's my concern.
Your answer,
Thank you.
Councillor Potter.
Now, we've also gone through the documentation, and there's BSP Consulting who have done a consultation on behalf of the developers, and they've come up, Highways might be able to answer this one, they've come up with a personal injury accident for the past 5 years. They've come up with an analysis to say there was one slight personal injury accident and one serious personal injury accident in the last 5 years. And the PIAs recorded within the area do not indicate any significant clusters which could be considered uncommon for an urban area. Based on the PIA information analysed, the locality is not considered to suffer from any specific highway concerns. However, it negates to mention a very serious incident, a fatal road traffic collision on the 6th of November 2007. Also, just round the corner, within cluster distance, another serious road traffic accident. So I'm just wondering if this analysis is as faulty as it seems, can we in fact trust this analysis from BSP? Now, I found these on the internet as well as being aware of them as a councillor in Allestree, but there are others road traffic accidents on Oakover where a woman had 2 legs broken, there's one on Carsington, and of course recently there's another fatal outside the campus of Kedleston Road. So I'm just a little concerned that it's saying, the consultation document is saying there's no issues when there certainly are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Pegg has indicated that he needs to go. Councillor Khan and Councillor West have asked to speak, as has Councillor Kerr. I put it to you, we could move to the vote now, but that would deny you the right to speak, but it would give Councillor Pegg the chance to vote. And Councillor Harwood, all right, I'm going to move that we move to the vote. Those in favour of moving to the vote?
Chair, sorry, I think it would be appropriate to allow the councillors to speak if they want to speak.
Yeah, I'm asking them to waive that right to support Councillor Pegg. It seems there is a majority of moving to the vote. Is there any objection to that? Anybody, as one, objects to it?
Chair, I'd have to say that it would be wrong to deny councillors the right to speak on the application.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Chair, for me, I can stay at least another 10 minutes at the maximum.
Thank you for solving our dilemma. Thank you. And bearing in that in mind, can please people be concise? Councillor Khan, then.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very concise. I mean, you and I have sat on these meetings many times when we looked favourably upon developers who, want to sort of compromise with us and listen to our point of view in this. I'm wondering whether, on this instance, the developer can sort of give us some kind of reassurance about the 22 people that are going to be losing their residents, as it were, and tell us whether they've actually looked at getting them a place or somewhere else or not. I mean, we don't have to refuse their, planning application as long we can even defer it as long as we get some favourable response from them.
No, you give us all notice.
To be consistent, I gave Councillor Potter the right to ask Mr Arben a question, and I'll certainly grant that to you as well. Would you like to put a direct question,
Yes.
get a direct answer from
Thank you.
Mr
I was
Arben?
trying to be quick, but thank you. Yeah, the question is, as councillors, you've already heard that we have to look after residents of the City of Derby. Now, we don't want you, not to develop it, but we want some assurances from you that the people who have been asked to leave that, you will help in finding them accommodation. Chair, with that in mind, are we in a position from the planning perspective to say, well, we can defer this until such time we get an answer from them?
Can't do it because that's not a planning ground.
Exactly the point, Chair, I was going to make.
It's not reasonable.
Members should not have that, bear that.
Legal advice. Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair, and I shall be concise as always. The benefit doesn't seem to outweigh the harm in this application, so I won't be supporting it.
I wish everybody could speak like that. Councillor Kerr, what an example to follow. I'm sure the applicant's representative has heard what is being said. Okay.
Apologies. And in terms of the second point I want to make is regarding the cycling. Could we amend the condition so that we're not just looking at the cycle parking areas to be provided, but also to ensure that there is good access to the cycle parking and access routes are agreed and workable?
Councillor
Thank you.
Harwood.
Well, thank you, Chair. Now, each week we get a list of planning applications. And every week I note how many planning applications are made similar to this, turning buildings, good houses, Piber Street comes to mind, into student accommodation. It seems to be a very financial rewarding for the developers. And there's a situation where, quite honestly, does this need to be redeveloped for student accommodation? Particularly when you take into mind that a lot of people that live there, and I go to Alistair quite often to park farm to shop, have turned these flats and that very artistic to the eye, and these people have lived there for a long, long time. And quite honestly, I know it's not a planning application, but I agree with others when they say turfing people out who've been there for years is not very pleasant. In fact, it shouldn't really be so. Just for a developer, in my opinion, to make money. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this application, again, is basically, in my opinion, not in keeping with the area at all. Park Farm is very pleasant. There are a lot of problems around there, which only this extension to student accommodation will cause further a problem. Councillor Webb made many, many points with planning matters and what have you, why this particular application should not be accepted. And I go along with those points that Councillor Webb made. Quite honestly, the people are not being taken into consideration. It may not be a planning matter, but it should be, because these people have been there years, and really, as the university have said, I believe, that there's plenty of accommodation in Derby, and plenty more in line, by the way, with further application, really should be in a position to turf these people out of accommodation that not only is their homes, but they've made them very, very pleasant places to be. And quite honestly, I feel for them, and at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, it's another developer looking to make money with no consideration at all for people.
Thank you. Can we move to the vote? Thank you. The recommendation is to grant permission with conditions. Those in favour of that recommendation? As amended to include the cycling access. That's 1 in favour. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Thank you. Clearly, permission is not granted. At this point, it's neither granted nor otherwise or refused. Can we have a recommendation from somebody that we refuse it? And if you wanted some reasons, Councillor Webb has quoted CP4, CP6, CP7 and GD5. That might at least keep things in a holding position for the officers to work on. Would somebody like to propose that?
I'll propose it, Chair.
Is that seconded?
I'll second it.
All right.
Basically on what Councillor Webber said, which I pointed out. Absolutely right.
All right, well, let's not speak to that. Those in favour of refusal on grounds... legal advice.
Chair, in terms of interpreting the various policies that Councillor Webb quoted, I assume we're talking about the amenity impact in terms of the scale and the mass of the extension, together with the inadequate parking and amenity provision for future occupants, and the amenity impact on existing residents of the Park Farm Centre. We're not introducing the need issue or the...
Oh, no. Couldn't have put it better myself. Stephen, do you want to add anything to that?
I think it was very similar.
Councillor Potter, do you want to add to that?
Yes, Chair, for Ian's benefit, could we also include Keith Beswick's, the designing out crime officer of the Derbyshire Constabulary, where he quotes local policies E24 and E25. Thank you.
Those in favour of refusal on those grounds with the conditions to be hammered out with the officers? Thank you. That's clearly carried. Thank you. And as is customary, should there be an appeal on this application, can we have a volunteer for the committee to speak on behalf of the council? Councillor
Well, you're
Potter?
looking at me, Chair, so I think, OK, let's go ahead with it. Thank you.
Happy with that? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That brings us to the... Yeah, give him a minute to go. Yeah. The potential future site visits, the Waterside Inn, better known as the Bridge Inn. Does anybody not know where that is? Do we need a site visit? It isn't open, so it's not much point. Right, we don't want to go there then. 69 Wardwick, well, you can find that quite quickly. Change of use to apartments. City centre living, which, of course, could be done a little more. Nobody want to go there. Anybody want to go to the DRI? Right. The Brook Medical Centre in 183... Well, yeah, there's a micropub down there now. 183 Kettleston Road, changing to residential development. Does anybody want to go there and see it? I think we can see it pretty well on a plan. There's no hills or anything. Councillor Kerr?
There is access or potential access across the brook there. And I think there's an old bridge route. I think there might have been a path in the past. That's the only thing I'm aware of interest in that area.
Okay. I suggest people go and have a look at it as part of their homework. 1 to 3 Reginald Road South, change of use from nursery to 11 flats. Yep. Are people in favour of a site visit to Reginald Road South?
To get into the site, Councillor Howard, is highly visible from the street. say to get into the site, 'cause it's highly visible from the street. Yeah, it's right on the junction, right on the road.
Well, all right, let's organise that one then. The final one is land to the north side of Parcel Terrace. Now, that's not a place you pass every day unless you happen to have business there. It is, and I think it would do us good, actually, to go and look just at the area. Perhaps we could organise the two on the same day. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so 2 then we will do. That concludes the business of this meeting. Thank you for your attendance. I declare the meeting closed at 8:15.